Welcome to the World Game Football Podcast, Episode 3. This is the official podcast for the United States Association of Football Leagues, or US-AFL. In this episode, we introduce two new segments. The first segment is entitled Fans Q&A, where we answer fan questions submitted to us by email or by the social nets. The second new segment is entitled Clearing the Smoke, where we discuss some common misconceptions about establishing promotion and relegation in the United States. So let's get it kicked off with our Fans Q&A. The Fans Q&A session is an opportunity for interested ones to voice questions to us about the league and our plans. It's also a chance to get involved by finding out how you can help. In our Fans Q&A segment this week, we have two questions submitted from our social nets. The first question is from Tim Sass, who asks, have you developed contacts with clubs interested in an open league system that practices promotion and relegation? Thank you for your question, Tim. To answer, several clubs have already shown interest in our project. This would include Sandy Springs FC, who I'm personally involved with here in Georgia. Now, take in consideration that since there is no defined admission criteria at this stage of league development, no formal presentation offers have been presented to clubs as of yet. While there is plenty of interest and curiosity in our progress from a number of state-level clubs, at the moment no formal signings are scheduled, which is normal for this time period in our plans. Our second question comes from Owen Thornhill, who asked a similar question in regards to established leagues. His question is, what leagues have signed up, and have you contacted the USSF, the United States Soccer Federation? Well, this is, of course, similar to the first question. And the answer is similar in that we've not made any formal contact with any leagues either. So leagues, teams, officials, we haven't really approached yet. We don't have the admission criteria set. And that's something that we as a group and as well as you as the fans that want to get involved can help us establish. But since we haven't done that, that phase of the development is still to come. But we're on schedule. But I'd like to add our primary goal right now is getting fans involved in the various states to assist with the planning on a regional level. Really, it'd be premature to offer anything to a current club, league, or official without the foundation that would involve the various incentives to be offered for involvement in the league structure. But all of that is on schedule and coming in time. On the USSF sanctioning, we've reached out to the USSF about sanctioning, but of primary concern now is the planning stages, as I said before, of building the U.S. Soccer Club pyramid structure. Sanctioning may even be a stage of development that we pursue after the state leagues are established. That can give you some idea of when an official approach would be desired. We'll update you more on this as it becomes available. Remember, you can always submit questions to us by email by sending to podcast@us-afl.com or simply submit your question on our Facebook page or on our Twitter feed. Next up is our segment called Clearing the Smoke. For our final segment of this podcast, I'd like to introduce a segment called Clearing the Smoke. This is where we'll take some commonly held misconceptions and try to clear the confusing smoke or information away for a clearer understanding of our league goals. In our first submission for this segment, we have a great question from Ken Gums. He states, I would like to see you guys talk about the difference between starting a club now instead of a century ago when most clubs and leagues started. Ken goes on to add, people created deep connections to local clubs because there was no other sporting options. Generations passed and deep cultural ties were made. This happens everywhere with every sport, soccer overseas or college and high school sports here in the United States. But today, a kid can flip on a TV, go online, watch any club in the world. He can get involved with online fan groups and do things that fans a century ago could not. It makes starting successful lower divisions much harder. Promotion and relegation doesn't solve that, he says. Ken goes on to add, now the sports customer has choices when before they didn't. Sure, they can offer game day experiences, but these games are usually played in awful stadiums and with weak competition. People have choices and make comparisons. Teams don't play in a vacuum any longer. King goes on to say, it's easy to say that the U.S. should just adopt what the rest of the world does, but the rest of the world planted these seeds a century ago. We didn't. Don't you think that makes a difference, he asks. Well, Ken, you're absolutely correct. The world of sport is completely different than it was a century ago on many different levels. The way clubs and leagues operate has morphed and evolved over decades under different countries, cultures, religions, regions, you name it. Even a person like me, I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I've been following Manchester United for 23 plus years. I also spent a year in Sweden where I supported Malmö's famous football club in southern Sweden. But I became a Manchester United fan primarily, just as you mentioned, through the technology that was available to me. Never been to Old Trafford personally, always watched them online or on TV. So when I came back stateside from Sweden, the internet was not common, so I relied on a subscription from the English weekly, the Daily Mail. That was my technology at the time, a newspaper from England. And that arrived to me a week later than the games were played, so I would get United's results a week late. Now later, of course, about the early 90s, I started to take advantage of the internet to get instantaneous news on my favorite club, and it's been like that ever since. Your question happens to include a preconception about our league that does need some explaining or maybe clarification, and I can understand why there's confusion about that. The US-AFL is not being established for the simple reason of bringing promotion and relegation to a national league. It's being established to give opportunities to players, fans, and investors that simply doesn't exist right now. It happens to include promotion and relegation. So it's an effect of the league that gives these things. It's not the reason for the league. So let me try to explain further. To your question, it is true that today's technology makes it possible for a person like me to continue to follow a club like Manchester United across the big pond from me. But it doesn't negate the potential for a wider range of support of teams on a more local level. In other words, it's not an all or nothing scenario that we see. In addition to technology and what has been done for the fan, there's a critical element we also need to consider. Today's typical sports fan is not limited to support just one club in the local community as he would a century ago, as you pointed out. Today, it's not uncommon for fans to support many teams, and possibly from many sports. One good example here that I can bring up is our own US-AFL league official, Daniel Northington. We'll be talking to him in a coming podcast, and we can go and elaborate more on this. But he lives in New Jersey. He supports multiple soccer teams, home and abroad, but also a team in the NFL, Gridiron US Football, and it's a team that's nowhere near where he lives. So the US-AFL will not change this, nor does it want to. Our goal is not to try to recreate an atmosphere or experience for the fan from a century ago. We simply aim to create more levels of professional play and provide an additional choice for players, fans, investors, etc. So one might ask, if someone like Daniel has these affiliations already, why would he want to be involved in establishing this new league? Well, the answer may be as simple as he desires something in a sporting world in America that doesn't presently exist. And if it's going to happen, Daniel knows he will need to be involved in creating it. No one will do it for us. Let's look at this from 3 different areas: fans, players, and investors. Let's start with the fans. Remember, even though the internet, satellite, and other forms of communication gives you instant access to the world game at an unprecedented level, during the same technological time, a supporters group organized and owned a team called FC United of Manchester, created in Manchester, England. This team was born from a collection of Manchester United fans who saw the need for a local club that gave a different type of experience and opportunity to the local fan, the local player, the supporter, that was impossible at Manchester United. It's also interesting to note that although many now support FC United as their main team, many still also support, or at least are fondly of, Manchester United. The level of play for FC United is nowhere near that of the English Premiership, and their average attendance is less than 2,000 persons a game. But that satisfies the desire of those fans in that region. It's a success story even though it's not a top-level team in a top-level league. There is room for a different type of supporter, that a supporter like Daniel, for instance, myself, and others who are finding interest in what we are trying to establish here. Let's think about players too. We all know that a lot of fans like to go for the top leagues, the best players, the fastest, the most powerful, most skillful. But those aren't the only players that exist. In our next podcast, we'll have the pleasure of speaking with several players and a manager from Sandy Springs FC who can explain how an open league gives their players an opportunity to play professionally when ordinarily they would not have the same opportunities if they cannot get a tryout with the few teams relative to the number of players nationwide in the current leagues. Please stay tuned to hear their expressions in a future podcast. Investors. We have the unique opportunity to give investors more options than currently available. We'll do this by creating the right conditions for involvement, affordable entry fees, reasonable travel distances, transparent rules, and financial incentives. Interested investors of a club may be priced out of the enormous franchise fees assigned by MLS and NASL, but more than that, since the US-AFL is open to all that meet certain criteria, they don't have to wait for a league to allow them to participate, and nothing will prevent them from building and progressing up the league pyramid. So there are actually a lot more opportunities for investors than currently available for the different potential levels of investment that exist. Ken, if you and others would like more information on this subject, I'd encourage you to continue to contact us and ask more questions and just give us your comments about what you feel will help. But I want to thank you for your great question about what we think about starting a league in today's sporting climate. That's all the time we have for today, but we'll be back next week with more segments as well as interviews with current players to get their feelings about the goals of the US-AFL. This is Dre Footy. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again soon.